clarity. That was the main case made for the new rule of six. After months of changing guidelines and growing confusion, no one would now be left in any doubt about what they should do. That at least was Boris Johnson's argument this week. Except now other governments looking at the same evidence are proposing rules that are slightly but significantly different. In Wales, the rule of six will not apply if you're outside. And, as in Scotland, it will not apply to younger children, those aged under 12. Our man Bob Walker has been to Uppingham in Rutland, which has one of the lowest levels of cases in the UK, to see how people there are reacting to the new rules.
Very frustrating. I think it's very frustrating and heartbreaking for a lot of people.
From a family perspective, as a grandparent, it's very frustrating not to be able to see all the grandchildren at once as a group, and that will be particularly frustrating at Christmas. But having said that, I agree with it in principle. My main regret is that the four governments can't get the same message across everywhere at the same time, and I think that would be a great help to everybody and stop these mixed messages.
How do you know what's going on in government? You don't know how difficult it is and the complications they've got, and just shooting them down in flames without coming up with an alternative solution. I'm kind of sick of things being attacked, really. I just assume the government's doing its best.
I think that if it's a rule, it's a rule. I think my only sort of caveat to that is obviously one person in government who didn't stick by the rule, which is a thorn in, I think, personally my side.
Well, the Conservative supporting newspapers this morning, the Sun, the Mail and the Telegraph, are highly critical of these new rules and claim that up to half the Cabinet disagreed with them, and begin to report growing unhappiness on the Tory backbenches as well. Quoted, there is Steve Baker, who we can talk to now, the Conservative MP for Wickham. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Nick.
From those voices we heard there, yes, frustration, but a degree of acceptance amongst the population. Do you not think that is the national mood?
Well, of course, there's a degree of acceptance. This is a serious virus, and if you have comorbidities, then it can be very dangerous for you. And of course, people want to do the right thing. Boris has talked about trusting the common sense of the British people. But when you look at the draconian nature of the imposition on the British people, the shifting and uncertain legal environment, the lack of scrutiny, and what has changed about this disease, I think it's now time to say that this is not a fit legal environment for the British people. It's time to move to a voluntary system, unless the government can demonstrate otherwise. And it's time for us to actually start living like a free people, not subjecting ourselves to constantly shifting legal requirements, which I think now no one can fully understand.
Even if people want that, because an opinion poll showed that 77% of people were in favour of these restrictions. And when he went further and said, well, how's about a curfew being limited in your movements overnight? 2/3 of the population, almost 62%, were in favour of that.
Well, of course, this is a democracy, and that's one of the reasons why I think that these rules need to be brought before Parliament. If people look at the Hansard Society's coronavirus dashboard, they can see the extent to which these instruments imposing these rules have not had parliamentary scrutiny. Insofar as they do get it, it's often retrospective, and that is out of kilter with the draconian nature of what's been done. But
would it make any difference to you, Steve, if they altered the rules slightly? We heard from Wales's First Minister a few minutes ago, where the rules don't apply if you're outside, they don't apply to younger children, those 11 and younger, or are you really just objecting to the whole principle of it?
I am now saying that this is not a fit legal environment for a free people. There are 5 things that have changed. I'll be as brief as possible. The first is that the incidence of coronavirus measured by the ONS is now about 1 in 2,000. That's about a quarter of the level of an epidemic. We've not been at epidemic levels since about the 10th of May, thereabouts. Second, that coronavirus deaths are about 100 a week in England and Wales, down from 1,000 a day. Third, our hospitals, they're really quite empty. I've got the data in front of me. I think 837 patients in hospital, down from about 20,000.
Two more.
Fourthly, the cost of lockdown now, according to the government's own calculations, adjusting for comorbidity, is now greater than the cost of COVID in terms of quality-adjusted life years. And it's now not even clear that lockdown was required to get R below 1. I'm looking at a Royal Society paper which shows R going below 1 on the 13th of March. People will remember it came into force on the 23rd. That corresponds with a Bristol University paper. It is, I believe now, madness to continue subjecting the people to to what now amounts to arbitrary power without scrutiny. They're being told to go, kids can go to school, but not to a party afterwards. Eat out to help out, but don't meet in more than 6. There's a rule that you can go to church and have more than 6 people in church, provided you don't go to church in a group of more than 6. I don't even really know what that means. You can go to work in whatever numbers are required, but not to the pub afterwards. I mean, and as for the marshals, I mean, God bless them. I'm sure they'll all be individually lovely people. But it seems to me the effect of having COVID marshals will be to turn every public space in Britain into the equivalent of going through airport security, where we're badgered and directed and forced to and fro. I'm not willing to live like this.
I sense that you think something about Britain, something you think about British liberty is at stake here, not just an argument about the rules about how to keep us safe.
That is absolutely right, yes. I mean, the British people have common sense and good quality regard for one another, and we heard that in your clip there. The lady saying the government are doing their best was absolutely right. Of course the government are doing their best. And that's why I wrote to Boris Johnson talking about the structure of expert incentives. It just very briefly, unfortunately, when you look at just the truth that experts are human too, the incentives are set up to promote lockdown and restrictions and not to promote our exit from them. And this is now a real problem, that this technocracy now, for our own safety, as always throughout history, necessity has been the plea for the infringement of liberty, as I think it was Pitt that said.
Now, I want to infringe your liberty to keep going, because I just want to get the chance to ask you a question about Brexit, which is your other great passion. Alongside liberty, people remember you leading the fight against Theresa May's Brexit deal. Were you surprised, or do you agree with fellow Brexiteer Lord Lamont, who said on The World at One yesterday, the government are in a terrible mess and in a hole. This could take us back to square one with a terrible dilemma, agreeing with Lord Howard that they are messing up this Brexit negotiation on trade now?
Well, I have forsworn being a leading voice on Brexit, and I've given up a leadership role on it, but I did rather imagine you'd ask me about this. The reality is we are in a bad place, and it's because of a series of very poor decisions, not least the decision about accepting the EU sequencing. But if I may, the good news is that there is a solution tantalisingly within our grasp. If we would just agree a free trade agreement that both sides have said they want, together with the Prosperity UK border arrangements, or even the mutual enforcement arrangements that Barney Reynolds has set out, then we can just get on and move forward without any of these
easy to say, but may prove impossible to do. Just, it's got to be very, very brief, Mr. Baker, if you would, because we're running out of time now. But crudely, do you think saying that we're prepared to breach international law was a terrible error like Michael Howard, or do you think it's inevitable to get the EU to concentrate?
I think that the handling was wrong, but I think we should now be willing to repudiate the whole treaty on the basis of the EU's bad faith, which in my mind is undoubted.
Steve Baker, thank you for joining us.